Lord Jim, published in 1900 by Joseph Conrad, is a psychological and moral novel exploring themes of honor, courage, redemption, and the existential struggle between self-image and reality. Through the journey of Jim, a young British seaman, Conrad examines how one catastrophic decision can shape a life and haunt a soul. Jim, the son of an English parson, grows up with a romantic vision of heroism and noble deeds, largely influenced by the sea adventures he reads in books. He envisions himself as a brave and honorable seaman, destined to face danger with dignity and emerge as a hero. After training at a merchant marine academy, he becomes a water clerk, a minor but necessary job for a young man with limited experience. Still, his romantic dreams of heroism persist, and he eagerly awaits his chance to prove himself. Jim is posted on various ships, working through mundane tasks and tedious routines until, finally, an opportunity arises for him to test his courage. Jim becomes first mate on the Putna, an old, worn-out ship carrying 800 Muslim pilgrims across the Indian Ocean to Mecca. The passengers are poor and treated with little regard by the European crew, a reflection of the racial and cultural tensions of colonialism. Jim serves under an indifferent and scrupulous captain, a stark contrast to the noble image of seafaring heroism he had imagined. Soon, a dark event turns his idealistic dreams into a nightmare. One night, the Putna hits an underwater object, causing a breach in the hull. The ship begins to take on water, and Jim's worst fears seem to come true. The captain and the other officers are convinced that the ship is doomed and decide to abandon it, leaving the passengers behind to face certain death. Overcome by fear and panic, they flee in a lifeboat. Jim initially resists, wanting to stay on board and hold out hope for a rescue. But as the moments tick by, his courage falters, and he follows the officers onto the lifeboat. The Putna doesn't sink, and it is eventually found drifting at sea, with all the passengers alive and unaware of how close they came to being abandoned. Jim's decision to flee in the lifeboat, a decision he made in a moment of blind panic, becomes a source of deep shame and regret, shattering his image of himself as a brave, honorable man. Jim's cowardice during the Putna incident leads to a court of inquiry by the colonial authorities in British India. The scandal tarnishes Jim's reputation, turning him into a disgraced seaman. His guilt is compounded by the relentless shame he feels for betraying his own ideals. The court strips Jim of his seaman's certificate, effectively ending his career at sea and leaving him directionless. This public disgrace is Jim's crucible, and it transforms him from an idealistic young man into a soul searching for redemption. Enter Marlowe, a seasoned sea captain who becomes intrigued by Jim's case and offers him sympathy and understanding. Marlowe becomes a close confidant and acts as both narrator and moral observer of Jim's journey. Through Marlowe's eyes, the reader gains insight into Jim's inner struggle, seeing him as a complex character who is neither purely heroic nor villainous, but deeply human. Marlowe takes it upon himself to help Jim find a place where he can redeem himself and escape his past. Marlowe uses his connections to find Jim work in remote locations across the East Indies, hoping to help him escape the shame of the Putna incident. However, Jim's guilt continues to haunt him, and he often leaves each new post whenever reminders of his past surface. Eventually, Marlowe sends him to a distant trading post in Patusan, a jungle settlement in Southeast Asia, where Jim has a chance to reinvent himself in a community isolated from the outside world. In Patusan, Jim quickly earns the respect of the native people by showing courage, intelligence, and integrity. He helps the villagers fight off a local warlord and his band of raiders. Emerging as a heroic figure they come to know as Tuan, or Lord Jim. In this isolated world, free from his past, Jim begins to restore his sense of honor and self-worth. He falls in love with Jewel, a young woman who shares his sense of isolation, and they build a life together, one that appears stable and fulfilling. Jim's new role as protector and leader gives him the chance to live out the heroism he once dreamed of, and he finally seems at peace. However, Conrad builds a sense of foreboding, as Jim's escape from his past feels too fragile and dependent on the illusion of his redemption through honor. Jim's newfound peace is shattered when a ruthless European pirate named Gentleman Brown arrives in Patusan. Brown, a notorious figure with no moral compass, represents the dark side of colonialism and human nature. He is stranded with his gang and demands entry to the village. Despite warnings from the villagers and allies who see Brown's cruelty, Jim chooses to negotiate with him, believing that he can resolve the situation peacefully and uphold his ideals of honor. But Jim's judgment of Brown is clouded by his romanticized view of human nature. Brown betrays Jim's trust, using the opportunity to attack the village and causing a violent clash that leaves several villagers dead, including Dane Waries, the beloved son of the village chief, Doramin. This betrayal reveals the tragic flaw in Jim's character, his belief that he could impose his sense of honor and redemption on others, even on a man as corrupted as Brown. The villagers, devastated by the loss of Dane Waries, demand retribution, viewing Jim as responsible for the tragedy due to his poor judgment. Jim does not resist their anger. He realizes that his actions, though made with good intentions, have led to a devastating betrayal of the trust the people of Patusan had in him. Finally understanding the weight of his mistakes, he chooses to face the consequences without attempting to flee or defend himself. In a moment of tragic resolution, Jim walks to Doramin, the chief, who holds him accountable for his son's death. Standing before the grieving father and the outraged villagers, Jim accepts his fate, offering his life as penance. Doramin, in an act of both justice and vengeance, shoots Jim, ending his life. Jim's death is both a punishment and an act of redemption. He dies with dignity, atoning for his failures, but leaving behind a complex legacy. Lord Jim is filled with profound themes that explore the human psyche, the conflict between ideals and reality, and the moral consequences of one's actions. The novel's exploration of heroism and cowardice questions the very nature of what it means to be honorable. Jim's early romanticism of heroism is shattered, and his journey through disgrace, isolation, and ultimate sacrifice illustrates the consequences of a life haunted by a single moment of weakness. The jungle setting of Patusan symbolizes both a physical and psychological wilderness where Jim confronts his inner turmoil and tries to rebuild his life. The jungle's isolation allows Jim to escape the immediate consequences of the Putna incident, but it also traps him in a situation where his ideals are bound to be tested. Gentleman Brown represents the corrupting, destructive forces of human nature. His arrival in Patusan forces Jim to confront the darkness in others, a darkness he had underestimated, leading to his fatal misjudgment. Jim's death by Doramin's hand is symbolic of a final, uncompromising judgment on his character. The novel also examines the theme of colonialism, as the European characters enter Patusan with a mix of arrogance and condescension toward the native culture. Conrad portrays the complex relationships between the colonizers and the colonized, suggesting that even in Jim's quest for honor, He cannot fully understand or integrate into the world of Petusin, a world that ultimately holds him accountable for his actions. In Lord Jim, Conrad explores the complexities of human character, the weight of guilt, and the possibility of redemption. Jim's life is marked by a constant struggle between his ideals and his failures, his yearning for heroism and the reality of his human limitations. Though he dies in tragedy, his willingness to face his fate at the end gives his story a sense of redemptive closure. Through Marlowe's narration, we are left with a haunting sense of Jim's inner conflict, his flawed nobility, and the poignant truth that heroism is often a matter of personal sacrifice rather than triumph. Lord Jim is a meditation on human fallibility and the quest for meaning in a world that often provides none. Jim's journey reflects the complex nature of honor and courage, and Conrad's novel remains a powerful exploration of the human spirit, revealing the paradoxes that define us all.